The wind screamed through the ruins of Fort Mason as Sergeant Daniel Cole tightened his grip on the wounded German shepherd. The storm howled like the ghosts of the soldiers who never came home. In the dog's eyes, frozen, terrified, human, he saw something he thought he'd buried in Afghanistan. Guilt. "Easy, boy," he whispered. But when the radio crackled, "Cole, you're not alone out there." He realized the voice wasn't coming from his headset. Snow gnawed at the bones of Fort Mason, a decommissioned army post strangled by wind and history. The storm scoured the parade ground into a white, shifting sea, and the old barracks, window sockets like eye holes, watched Sergeant Daniel Cole cross the drifts with a flashlight trembling in his gloved hand. Daniel, 38, carried the hard geometry of a soldier who had been sanded down by years, square jaw dusted with a week's stubble, close-cropped dark hair salted at the temples, eyes a combat gray that seemed to measure distance and threat automatically. Afghanistan had written itself into his gait, left knee a half-click delayed from shrapnel, right shoulder rolling to compensate for an old blast concussion, and into his habits, counting steps, holding his breath when doors opened, cataloging sounds in layers, wind, ice ticks, metal creak, something else. He had been good at war until war refused to let go. The VA called it PTSD, but to Daniel it felt like a radio that wouldn't stop scanning for frequencies that no longer existed. The ranchers in town said a shepherd was loose on the ridge, a big one limping, howling at dusk. Daniel had volunteered because winter patrols kept his head quiet, and because a 12-year-old girl named Lily Hart, small, freckled, with a gap-toothed smile and a stubborn streak the color of her knitted red hat, had thrust a blurry phone photo at him outside the diner that morning and said, "He's not mean. He's scared. Please find him." Lily lived with her aunt on the outskirts, a kid who collected injured birds and laminated their stories for school. She had the kind of eyes that made Daniel swallow his no. In the ruined motor pool, he found the tracks first. Wide, splayed pads knifed deep into ice, blood stippling the troughs. The beam of his light smoked through blown snow, raking rusted hoods, skeletal lift arms. Then the wind bent a sound toward him that wasn't wind, the short, corkscrewed breath of something trying not to cry out. He angled around a collapsed fence line and saw the German shepherd wedged against a half-sunken culvert, hind leg twisted, coat a mottled saddleback of black and tan gone gray with frost. The dog was big, easily 90 pounds, muscle wasted by hunger, hip bones like knuckles, a torn left ear, a pale scar running from the brow into the mask, as if a blade had once signed his face. His eyes, amber gold and unsettlingly lucid, fixed on Daniel with the weary appraisal of a veteran checking a doorframe. Danger or salvation. The tag on a frayed collar was a circle of dull brass etched down to nothing. Daniel's breath plumed. His hands, even in wool, felt stiff with the old mountain cold that used to creep into desert nights. "Easy, buddy," he said, voice low, the way he used to talk to green privates right before the first breach. Anchor the tremor to a tone. The shepherd's lips peeled an inch, not a snarl so much as an announcement. "Pain lives here." Daniel crouched, moved slow, made himself small. He read the situation like a corridor. Snow drifted over frozen metal, slick footing, dog can't launch, leg likely dislocated, maybe fracture, storm clock ticking down. The wind shouldered the barracks and dragged a scrape from some unseen sheet of tin. The dog flinched. So did Daniel, spine lightening with a memory of corrugated roofs catching fire. His radio crackled on his chest. "Cole, status." The voice belonged to Chief Ranger Alvarez, a compact woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and a habit of balancing compassion with the kind of calm that made men twice her size slow down and listen. Daniel thumbed transmit. Motor pool at Fort Mason. Found the shepherd. He's hurt. Blizzard inbound. Then you've got 20 minutes to be smart, Alvarez said. Copy? Copy. He clicked off and pulled a coil of orange rescue line from his pack. The dog watched the rope like it was a snake. Daniel talked while he worked, narrating to fill the void. Name's Daniel. I used to be loud for a living. Got quiet after. You look like someone who understands quiet. The dog's chest heaved. The pupils were blown with adrenaline, yet the eyes did not flick away. Daniel edged forward, palm up, fingers tucked, letting the dog take him in. He smelled of old motor oil, wet wool, and the metallic sweetness of blood. The dog smelled of damp leaves, rust, and wild fear. When his hand was close enough to feel breath, Daniel stopped and waited. A heartbeat. 2. The shepherd leaned a millimeter, nostrils testing the map of this human, then eased back with a shiver that rattled bone. All right, Daniel whispered. He slid the rope behind the forelegs, careful of the twisted hindquarter. Pain flashed the dog's face into something sharp. A warning rumble tremored in his chest. Daniel froze, let the rumble pass through him like weather. I know, he said. It hurts. We're going to move on 3. He counted like he had counted with men stacked on a door. 1, 2, on 2.5 he lifted, taking as much weight as his bad shoulder would tolerate. The dog's scream was small and strangled, and it bounced off the barracks and came back as something older, a chorus Daniel did not want to decipher. He slid the shepherd free of the culvert and onto a bed of snow his forearm carved. The dog collapsed and panted, forepaws dragging. Daniel's head filled with the pragmatic haze of field care. He used a folded bandana as a pad, a cravat from the rope, immobilized the joint long enough to move. When he scooped the shepherd up, the weight a reluctant child's, the animal stiffened, then made a decision Daniel understood in his marrow. Trust today or die in 30 minutes. The storm pressed close. Snow went horizontal and erased edges. Daniel trudged the 100 yards to the truck by memory of compass headings and the old parade ground drains he'd studied on a map at dawn like he used to study sat imagery. He set the dog in the back seat on his parka, cracked the heater, and winced as he stripped his glove. Blood seeping through a crescent of punctures along his palm where the dog's teeth had tested bone and mercy. He cleaned it with alcohol from a trauma kit and hissed as the cold fire bit. The dog watched, head propped, the kind of quiet that isn't absence but concentration. When Daniel reached to check the splint, the shepherd's tongue touched his wrist once, a ghost of a question and an apology. We're even, Daniel said, and for a second, just a second, the radio static in his head dimmed. He should have driven straight to animal control or the clinic the county contracted, but the clinic was an hour in whiteout, and rules written by people who had never watched a friend bleed out were hard to obey when the friend had a tail. He turned toward Lily's side of town instead. She would have blankets, patience, the kind of soft the dog might accept. The truck's tires skated and grabbed. The heater moaned. Fort Mason fell behind, swallowed by white. Wind found every seam of the cab and whistled through them like breath through teeth. Halfway to the highway, the dash radio stuttered, the same way it had in Coast when they'd run under power lines that sagged with broken insulator bells. Cole, it said, a thin voice soldered with static. You're not alone. He flicked the knob, off. The voice continued anyway, soft and close. a leak in the world. He remembers, it said, and so do you. Daniel's hands went colder than the air. For a half-mile, he practiced disbelief like a drill, ticking boxes, faulty speaker, AM bleed in from a distant station, stress hallucination. The dog's ears twitched. The shepherd lifted his head and stared past Daniel's shoulder at the back window, pupils slick coins. In the glass was only snow. He turned the radio back on, because men who had been through what he'd been through knew you stared into the thing that wanted to unman you and made it explain itself. Only weather, the robotic woman repeating wind speeds no human had a right to be in. He shut it again, and the voice did not return, and that should have comforted him. It didn't. Lily lived in a small bungalow with peeling green paint and a porch sagging with snow. When he knocked, the door was opened by her aunt, Jo Hart, 45, broad-shouldered, cheeks red from wood stove heat, hair pinned in a practical bun with a pencil. Jo taught 8th grade science and had the no-nonsense warmth of a woman who had learned to fix her own sink and to hide her own tremors. She took in the blood on Daniel's bandage and the dog's vast head over his shoulder and said, "Lord have mercy. Get in." The living room smelled of cinnamon and wet wool. Lily, 12, slight, bundle of red hat and too large sweater, spun off the couch and froze when she saw the shepherd. He came. She breathed, like a wish clocking over to fact. The dog held very still, taking in wallpaper, lamp glow, Lily's smallness, the way her palms opened as if to hold rain. Daniel set him on quilts by the stove. The shepherd's chest rose and fell. The voice in Daniel's skull began to ebb under the warmth and the stove's steady tick. Jo fetched her first aid box. Lily fetched a stainless bowl and filled it with warm water and the ceremony of a priest. When Daniel trimmed away matting and cleaned the leg, Jo watched him with that brisk teacher's concern that is half scold, half care. "You should be at the clinic." "Road's gone," he said. "We'll take first shift." She nodded. "And I'll call Alvarez in the morning before she calls me." Lily knelt and spoke to the dog with a hush that seemed to rearrange the molecules of the air. "Thank you for being brave," she said. "We'll be brave too." The shepherd blinked and put his head, absurdly heavy, on the toe of her sock. The stove popped. Outside, the storm worried the eaves like a thing with hands. Daniel leaned back against the wall and let the heat bleed into his coat. For a moment, he was somewhere else. A far room, a flicker of lantern, a man leaning, a dog breathing, all of it ancient as fire. He opened his eyes when the house sighed. He thought the wind had shifted. Then he realized the sound had form. The truck radio on the porch table, he had carried it in without knowing why, whispered. "Cole," it said, nearer than near. "He knows the place you left." Lily's head lifted. "Did you hear?" Joe's hand found the radio, knuckles tight. "Old sets pick up odd things in storms," she announced to the room, to herself, to a past she didn't want in her house. "We'll unplug." She pulled the cord. The radio died. The whisper didn't. It braided the wind and the stove's breath and Lily's soft talk into one impossible strand. Daniel felt the old algorithm in him wake, the one that measured threat even when the threat had no face. He slid closer to the dog and set his uninjured hand on the big neck. Bone, heat, heartbeat. "Not tonight," he said into the hush, whether to memory, to storm, or to whatever voices hunted men who had carried the war home. "Not with her here." The whisper receded like a wave. The dog exhaled. Lily smiled a small, fierce smile Daniel had not seen on a child in a long time. and if something outside the window pressed an outline into the snow that was not tree or man, no one named it. Summary in story. In a whiteout over Fort Mason, former soldier Daniel Cole rescues a wounded German shepherd and brings him to 12-year-old Lily Hart and her Aunt Jo. As the storm deepens, a voice rides the dead radio, hinting that Daniel's past, and something watching in the snow, has followed the dog into their home. The storm did not end so much as change shape. By morning, the world outside Joe Hart's house was a bruised, gray quiet, the kind that came after a long scream. Snow pressed against the windows in soft cliffs. The power lines sagged, motionless, bearded with frost. Inside, the fire had burned itself to a red eye, and the house smelled of wool, antiseptic, and the faint copper tang of blood. Daniel Cole woke in the armchair where exhaustion had nailed him. His left hand throbbed. The bite punctures had swollen despite alcohol. The dog, Lobo, as Lily had named him before dawn, lay by the stove, head on paws, chest rising in shallow tides. Jo was already moving about the kitchen in a flannel shirt and sweatpants. Her hair frizzed loose from sleep, the physical embodiment of practical fatigue. She brewed coffee in an old enamel pot and glanced over. "You were talking in your sleep," she said. "Names, numbers, Afghanistan." Daniel flexed his jaw. "Does it matter?" "Only if it's still happening," Jo said softly. "Out there." She nodded toward the window. "Or in here." Lily shuffled in, wrapped in a blanket like a cloak, bare feet on wood floor, her hair static with sleep. "He's better," she announced. "He drank water." Daniel leaned forward. Lobo's eyes opened, amber, lucid, watching him with that uncanny soldier's awareness. The leg was swollen but aligned. The dog's tail moved once, a mechanical signal of truce. "Good boy," Daniel said. "We'll get you to a vet when the road clears." The radio on the counter, a new battery unit Jo used for weather updates, crackled. The voice that emerged was thin, official, harmless. "Montana Department of Transportation reports Route 7 closed due to fallen timber." Jo exhaled. Normal static. Normal authority. Daniel could feel the muscles in his back unclench one by one, until the next sentence came. "Sergeant Cole, please respond." His head snapped toward it. Jo froze mid-pour. Lily's eyes widened. The voice continued, faint but directed. Male, late 30s, steady as a rangefinder. "Cole, this is Lieutenant Reeves. You left one behind. Time to finish the job." The words slid into the room like cold fog. Jo turned the knob to off. The radio hissed once and died. "Faulty frequencies," she muttered. Old lines still bouncing military bands. But Daniel was no longer in the kitchen. The name Reeves detonated a shape behind his eyes. A man in desert camo, square face, scar from temple to chin, eyes that had once mirrored Daniel's own. Lieutenant Aaron Reeves, 37, field commander of Delta Company, dead 8 years. Friendly fire incident, 1 kilometer outside coast. Daniel remembered the flash, the scream, the report filed under thermal misidentification. His hands shook hard enough to rattle the mug on the table. Jo watched him with a scientist's precision and a human's alarm. "Daniel," she said, "breathe." He did, roughly. "It's just old ghosts bouncing around the ionosphere." "You don't get ghosts on the NOAA channel," he said. Lily stepped closer to Lobo, sensing more through silence than words. The dog's hackles had lifted along the spine, his eyes tracking something unseen beyond the wall. Outside, snow shifted from the roof with a muffled boom. For one heartbeat, Daniel thought it was artillery again, that peculiar diaphragm-deep concussion. He stood, the instinct of the soldier rising through layers of domesticity. "I need air." "You need food," Joe said, but let him go. He stepped onto the porch. The cold was knife-pure, the air so sharp it felt metallic. The yard was a blank expanse save for one thing: prints circling the truck. Not human, too large for Lobo. 4 pads, deep, deliberate, walking the perimeter like reconnaissance. Daniel crouched, measured spacing. Wolf, maybe 200 pounds if the depth was real, though the idea made no zoological sense. He followed the trail to the tree line. It stopped abruptly, as if the maker had simply dissolved into the air. He scanned with the instincts of a man who had once lived by terrain and movement. Nothing. Only the forest pressing its black geometry against the white. A crack sounded behind him, footstep on the porch. Joe, hugging her cardigan around her, holding his coffee in one hand, a 12-gauge in the other. "You weren't the only one who learned to read footprints," she said. "They end at the trees." "I noticed." "We don't have wolves this size," Joe added. "Not this far south. Maybe the storm brought one down. Or something followed it," she murmured, eyes on the woods. She handed him the shotgun. "If you're going to stand out here, you might as well look the part." Inside, Lily and Lobo watched from the window. The girl's breath fogged the glass. The dog's reflection doubled hers. One human, one animal, both alert. Daniel stayed until the cold began to eat through his jacket, then went in. Joe set breakfast: powdered eggs, toast, a compromise of survival. Lily fed the dog broth by teaspoon. Between the house creaks and the kettle hiss, silence settled again, until the knock. 3 measured raps, heavy enough to make dust shiver from the doorframe. Joe stiffened. No one drives in this weather. Daniel moved to the window, peeled back the curtain. A man stood by the porch rail, wrapped in a state ranger coat, hood up, mirrored glasses catching what little light remained. His name badge read, S. Heller. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, maybe 40. He raised an ID wallet to the window, pressed it to the glass. "State Wildlife Division," he called. "Heard about a stray shepherd. May I come in?" Joe hesitated. "We didn't call anyone." Daniel opened the door halfway. The man's breath steamed white. His voice carried authority drilled into every syllable. "We monitor rabies cases. Storm brought down reports from last week. Big male shepherd, possibly trained, possibly military property." Daniel's pulse ticked faster. "Dog's hurt," he said. "Resting. You can see him from here." Heller's mirrored lenses tilted toward Lobo, then toward Daniel. "Name?" "Lobo." "Interesting choice." "He chose it," Lily piped up, earning a glance from both men. Heller smiled thinly. "Kids always think dogs choose things." His tone carried something almost rehearsed. He handed Daniel a folded paper, inspection notice, signatures too blurred to read clearly, and turned back toward the path. "Stay inside. Wolves moving east. If you hear howling, don't respond." The door shut behind him. Through the frosted window, they watched the ranger's shape dissolve into snowfall. Daniel exhaled. "Did that feel wrong to you?" Joe said. "Every part of it." Lobo growled low, chest vibrating against the floor. Lily leaned in. "He smelled scared," she whispered. Daniel sat again, rubbing his temples. The radio on the counter popped to life one more time, voice neutral, female, the real no-A operator this time. "Wolves confirmed near Route 7. Travelers advised to remain indoors." Joe muttered, "Well, at least one thing's normal." But Daniel's thoughts circled back to the man's glasses. how the reflection in them had shown not Daniel's face but the porch behind him, and in that mirrored space, for a split second, a second figure had stood beside him, uniform dusty with sand, eyes like burned copper. Lieutenant Reeves. He didn't mention it. Instead, he focused on Lily's laughter as she coaxed Lobo to eat. The clink of the spoon, the quiet rhythm of survival. As night fell, the wind changed direction again. Somewhere in the distance, a long, keening howl threaded through the snow, neither entirely canine nor human. The dog lifted his head, ears sharp. Daniel rose, shotgun in hand. The voice from the first night returned, faint through the static of memory or machinery, whispering his name. Cole. He swallowed hard. Yeah, he answered the dark. I'm still here. The house listened. The storm answered. And the radio without batteries clicked once, acknowledging. Summary in story. The blizzard eases, but unease deepens. Daniel hears a dead comrade's voice through the radio, finds massive prints circling the house, and meets a strange ranger whose reflection reveals something impossible. Night falls with howls rising from the forest, and the line between memory and haunting begins to collapse. By morning, the storm had grown quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that waits before something else begins. The world outside Joe Hart's house was silver and blue, a frozen photograph. Every branch wore ice, and the sky hung low and metallic, ready to fall again. Daniel Cole stood by the window, coffee gone cold in his hand. He hadn't slept. Each time he closed his eyes, the voice of Lieutenant Reeves crawled up through his skull, whispering through static and snow. You left us. Lobo, the German shepherd, slept near the fire, chest rising and falling with shallow patience. His fur gleamed gold under the firelight, but the shadows in his eyes were old, deeper than any animal's should be. Lily Hart sat cross-legged near him, sketching quietly in her notebook. Her small hand trembled with focus as she drew the scar on his muzzle, shading the place where the fur thinned around his old wound. He looks sad, she murmured. He looks tired, Daniel corrected, not realizing how much he was speaking of himself. Joe moved behind them, pulling a blanket tighter around her shoulders. She looked worn, eyes puffy from sleeplessness, hair escaping its bun, expression half mother, half sentinel. We'll need to ration the food if the plow doesn't come today, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, tapping against the table in uneven rhythm. Daniel nodded absently. His mind wasn't in the room. He kept replaying the voice from the night before, the radio that had no batteries, the words that bled through the static. He tried to convince himself it was just his head, that the ghosts of Afghanistan had finally found a new trick to torment him. But deep down, something colder told him that wasn't true. He grabbed his coat. I'm going to check the yard. Daniel, Joe started, but he was already out the door. The air outside was so sharp it felt like it could slice skin. Snow stretched unbroken for 100 yards, smooth as glass, except for one detail. Prints. A line of tracks circling the house. They were too big for Lobo, too clean for human. 4 pads, heavy pressure, the stride too long. The tracks weren't there last night. Daniel crouched. The prints had something strange inside them. Dark stains frozen in the middle. Not blood, but soot, like something had walked out of fire into snow. His heartbeat doubled. He followed them toward the tree line. That's when the smell hit him. Burnt oil, diesel, metal, impossible smells in this wilderness. He had known them once, thousands of miles away in desert heat. His breath clouded. He turned in a slow circle, scanning. The snow was motionless, The trees didn't move. Then, behind him, a voice, low, close, steady. "You left us, Sergeant." He spun, gun raised. Nothing. Only his footprints. But when he looked closer, a second set had appeared beside them. The same size, the same pattern, and they were still forming, as if something invisible was walking beside him, step by step. Daniel stumbled back, chest heaving. The prince stopped when he did. His rational mind screamed for logic, air pockets, melting patterns, tricks of light, but the soldier in him knew what his eyes were seeing. He whispered, "Reeves?" The forest didn't answer. Only the wind moved, whispering the sound of distant rotors, a helicopter that wasn't there. When he returned to the house, Joe met him at the door, eyes wide. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I have." Before she could answer, an engine's hum rose over the ridge. They both turned to the window. An orange snowcat crawled through the haze, the kind the local sheriff's office used for winter patrols. It stopped at the porch, engine coughing. A man climbed out, broad shoulders, short beard silvered with age, wearing a brown parka with a county badge stitched at the arm. "Sheriff Weller?" he said as Daniel opened the door. His breath clouded in front of him. "We're checking for missing persons. Heard from a couple ranchers that a ranger named Heller came through here yesterday." Joe's eyebrows lifted. "He did. Said he was looking for a stray dog." "Why?" The sheriff frowned. His eyes were the color of smoke, tired but clear. "Heller's dead, ma'am. Drowned in a river last December." The words hit like a blunt object. Joe's mouth opened, but no sound came. Lily froze, pencil falling from her hand. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. "You're sure?" he asked. "Positive. I helped drag his body out myself. If someone's wearing his coat, you best stay inside until we find who." The sheriff handed Daniel a two-way radio. "Channel 5. Use this if you see anything." Then he left, engine whining into the distance, swallowed by the gray. Joe locked the door twice. "You believe him?" she asked. Daniel stared out the window. "I believe the dead man I saw yesterday wasn't wearing a costume." That night, the wind rose again. The power flickered. Lily fell asleep on the rug, head against Lobo's side. The dog's breathing matched the rhythm of the storm, shallow but steady. Daniel sat by the window, shotgun across his lap. He could feel Reeves's presence like static under his skin. When the lights went out, the world went blue. Daniel's reflection in the window shifted, and behind it, another face appeared. Reeves, same eyes, same scar, same uniform from the desert, sand still clinging to his collar. "He remembers," the reflection said. The voice came not through the glass, but inside Daniel's skull. The dog. He was there. He saw it all. Daniel blinked, heart hammering. When he looked again, the reflection was gone. But the dog's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, two embers watching him with human grief. The blizzard had passed, but the cold remained like something sentient, crawling under the skin. The sun refused to rise. Instead, the morning hung in a bruised gray half-light. Daniel Cole woke to the sound of dripping water, slow, rhythmic, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. The roof was bleeding meltwater, forming a small pool beside the stove. The air smelled faintly of metal and smoke. Jo Hart was already awake, bundled in her father's old parka. She had dark circles under her eyes and a cigarette between her fingers. An old habit resurrected by fear. "I didn't sleep," she admitted when Daniel glanced at her. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow ones, like someone walking on carpet that isn't there anymore. Daniel nodded but said nothing. He had sat through the night, watching Lobo. The dog had not moved once. He lay facing the window, eyes open, unblinking, staring into the endless white outside. There was frost on his fur where his breath had frozen. At 7:08 a.m., the radio on the shelf crackled to life. No one had touched it. Static hissed softly, then a voice, not Reeves's voice, not yet, but a woman's, smooth and calm, like a newsreader from decades ago. Cold front expected to persist. Casualties reported along Route 89. Then the broadcast stuttered. The same words looped again and again, and then the voice shifted tone. Daniel Cole, your coordinates are confirmed. The radio fell silent. Joe's cigarette trembled in her hand. What the hell does that mean? It means someone's listening, Daniel muttered. Or something? He stepped outside. The wind had died completely, leaving the world unnaturally still. The sky was the color of unpolished steel. When he reached the tree line, he stopped dead. The snow there had melted in a perfect circle 20 feet wide. In the center was blackened ground, a burn mark shaped like a cross, symmetrical and clean, edges fused to glass. Steam rose faintly from it. Sheriff Weller's snowcat appeared over the ridge just then, its orange paint barely visible through the haze. The sheriff climbed out, face pink from the cold, eyes sharp. You called? I didn't, Daniel said. Well, that's funny, because someone on your radio did. Said the storm knocked your power out. I tracked the signal here. Daniel pointed toward the burn mark. That looked like downed power lines to you? Weller's eyes narrowed. Jesus, that's chemical. Maybe thermite. Daniel crouched beside it, feeling heat still bleeding through the crust. You ever seen anything like this? Once, Weller admitted quietly. During a mine explosion out east, the ground burned blue for 3 days. We called it the pit. They said it was natural gas. I didn't believe them. Before Daniel could reply, a sound tore through the forest. Long, low, metallic. It started as wind and ended as something almost alive. Half howl, half engine roar. Lobo's answering bark echoed from the house, sharp, defiant. Weller's hand went to his revolver. What the hell was that? Something that doesn't belong in this century, Daniel said. They both turned back toward the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, but beneath it, Daniel saw movement, shapes flickering between the trees, human outlines walking without sound. He blinked, and they were gone. That night, Joe locked every door and window. Lily slept under blankets beside Lobo, her small hand resting against his paw. He's shaking, she whispered. I think he's scared. Daniel didn't answer. He sat in the kitchen with Weller, 2 veterans surrounded by ghosts of different wars. You ever think about the ones you left behind? Weller asked quietly. Every damn day. Me too, Weller said. Except lately, I think they're the ones thinking about me. Daniel looked up. You mean dreams? Dreams don't leave boot prints, the sheriff replied. They drank in silence, the old wood stove ticking softly. Then from the living room came Lily's voice, soft, half asleep, pleading. Stop it. Please stop. Daniel and Weller rushed in. The radio glowed red again, though it was unplugged. The same woman's voice emerged, calm and precise. The storm doesn't forgive, Sergeant. You brought it back. The light from the radio grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. Lobo rose from the rug, hackles raised, a low rumble building in his chest. His eyes reflected the red glow, and for a moment, Daniel saw something impossible. A silhouette superimposed over the dog's body, tall and humanoid, wearing a soldier's gear. The air turned heavy. The voice shifted, male now, crackling through static and fire. "Finish what you started!" Joe screamed. The candles blew out. The room plunged into darkness except for the ember in the stove. Daniel raised his rifle, heart slamming in his chest. Through the dim orange glow, he saw a figure standing beside the dog. A man in combat fatigues, half burned, half whole, eyes like molten metal. Reeves. "Finish what you started," the ghost said again, stepping forward, his voice both inside and outside Daniel's skull. "Or she burns too." Lily gasped. The floorboards groaned under the weight of something unseen. Daniel fired. The muzzle flash lit the room for a split second, enough to see Reeves vanish, dissolving into smoke that smelled of jet fuel. The shot shattered the radio. Sparks leapt. The house fell into silence. Joe fell to her knees, trembling. "What was that?" Daniel lowered his gun slowly. "The past." But when he looked down, something glowed faintly on the rug, a footprint. Not a dog's. A soldier's boot print. Burned into the wood. The house smelled of gunpowder and smoke. The radio lay shattered on the floor, its red glow finally gone. But Daniel Cole knew the silence wasn't safety. It was only the pause before the next command. The boot print still smoldered in the rug, curling the edges like paper. Joe Hart was holding Lily tight, whispering fragments of prayers she hadn't spoken since her husband died. Lobo paced the room, muscles tight beneath his golden coat, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow as if tracking something invisible. Sheriff Weller reloaded his revolver with the steady, practiced rhythm of an old soldier. "We should leave," he said, voice low. "Now, before the storm comes back." Daniel looked toward the window. The sky outside wasn't dark. It was orange. Not the color of sunrise, but of fire reflected on snow. The tree line flickered. "Too late," he murmured. "It's already here." They stepped outside, boots crunching on frost. Heat shimmered across the valley where no flame should live. Snow fell upward, reversing direction in the wind. The air pulsed with a low hum, like helicopter rotors turning beneath the earth. Lobo growled, deep and guttural. Then, through the swirling fog, shapes began to appear. Men in combat fatigues, their faces obscured by melted helmets, bodies scorched black, yet still moving. One of them carried a rifle fused to his arm. Another dragged a length of chain behind him, each link glowing faintly red. Daniel's stomach turned. He knew those silhouettes. He'd carried their bodies out of a burning desert 12 years ago. "Reeves," Daniel whispered. The lead figure stopped 10 feet away. The air around him distorted like heat haze. When he spoke, it was through every direction at once. "You called fire on us, Cole. You gave the order." "I thought you were insurgents," Daniel said, voice cracking. "The coordinates—" "Were wrong," the ghost said simply. "You burned your own men alive." Weller stepped forward, gun drawn. "Whatever you are, back off." Reeves turned his head, and the sheriff's revolver melted in his hand, metal dripping like wax. Another soldier who thought he could save anyone. Lily whimpered. Joe pulled her close, shouting at Daniel, "What do they want from us?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Not you, me." The ghost nodded. "And the one who remembers." His burning eyes turned toward Lobo. The dog stiffened, baring his teeth, every muscle ready to spring. Daniel's mind cracked open like thin ice, and the memory came flooding in. The desert, the explosion, the broken body of a German shepherd lying beside the men he couldn't save. The dog had been part of the unit, their scout. Reeves had called him Lobo. He hadn't found a stray 3 weeks ago in the snow. He had brought home the same animal that had died in the fire. Lobo barked once, a sound halfway between defiance and grief. Reeves raised a hand. "You want peace? Finish what you started." The wind howled, pushing snow sideways. The ghosts began to move forward, their boots leaving trails of fire. Daniel backed toward the house, fumbling for matches. "Get inside!" he yelled. Weller grabbed Joe and Lily, dragging them to the doorway. The sheriff's face was pale but steady. "You've done this before," he said to Daniel. Daniel met his eyes. "Not like this." Inside, he tore open a can of kerosene, splashing it across the floorboards. The smell was thick and sharp, like the breath of the past itself. The ghosts pressed closer, their heat steaming the windows. Lobo stood between Daniel and the advancing figures, fur lifting in waves. "Daniel!" Joe cried. "Don't!" He shook his head. "There's no other way." Weller pulled his crucifix from beneath his shirt, voice breaking. "Then may God take what's his." Daniel struck the match. The flame flared, small and bright, too small to change anything, too bright to look away. For a heartbeat, it hovered between his fingers, refusing to die. Then he dropped it. Fire erupted. The walls caught first, then the curtains, then the ceiling. The air turned gold and red. The ghosts screamed, not in pain, but in release, their bodies unraveling into cinders. "Go!" Daniel shouted. Joe, Lily, and Weller stumbled through the back door into the snow. Lobo didn't move. The dog looked up at Daniel, eyes like 2 pieces of living ember, and stepped forward. Daniel felt tears sting his face. "You don't have to." But Lobo only barked once, a sound that said, "Yes, I do." He leapt through the flames into the advancing ghosts. The fire roared, swallowing everything. Daniel screamed his name, but the wind took it. The heat punched the breath from his chest, and then he felt Weller's hands dragging him backward, out into the cold. Outside, snow fell again, thick and clean. The cabin burned like a single candle in a sea of white. Joe held Lily as the girl sobbed into her coat. Daniel stood motionless, skin blistered, staring at the flames. When the roof collapsed, the fire dimmed, and from within came one last sound, a howl, long and echoing, rising into the storm. Then silence. Weeks later, when the thaw came, Sheriff Weller led the search. They found no bones, no bodies, just 2 sets of prints in the melted snow, side by side, leading toward the ridge. One belonged to a man, the other, a dog. Weller knelt there for a long time, hat in his hands. "Guess they made peace," he said quietly. "One way or another?" Joe nodded. "Maybe they're both free now." Lily looked at the tracks and whispered, "No, they're just going home." That night the valley was quiet again. The snow had lost its burn marks, and on the wind, if you listened close, came a faint, warm sound. Not a growl, not a voice. Something like breathing, slow and steady, as if the world itself had finally exhaled.